to know you, and we hope that you continue to attend the League of Women Voters meetings. So to introduce myself, my name is Allison Go. I am the president of the League of Women Voters. For those who are unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, but political organization. We are completely grassroots and run by volunteers, many of whom you will meet today in your facilitation sessions. You may know us from things like our pros and cons guide when it comes to ballot measures, candidate forums, advocacy efforts, and of course, things like this in redistricting. So thank you today for joining us. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that us in San Francisco, we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush-Ohlone peoples. They were the original inhabitants of San Francisco, and the Ramaytush-Ohlone never ceded, lost, nor forgot their sacred obligations and responsibilities of the original descendants or caretakers of this place. I think it's really fitting to acknowledge, especially as we are discussing redistricting and drawing lines in this land, that we benefit both from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we affirm their sovereign rights as the first people of San Francisco. So continuing on, we're going to be monitoring the chat. I know there's a lot of folks here today, so please put it in the chat. This meeting is for all of you all, and we're really glad that you're here to engage in this discussion. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have Danielle Deibler. She's the VP of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters, and also really thrilled to have Jonathan Stein as our guest speaker. Jonathan comes to our organization today from California Common Cause. Jonathan's a civil rights attorney and democracy reform advocate, coming to, again, from the California Common Cause after a decade of service on their board. Prior to that, served 4 years as the head of voting rights in the census program at the Asian Law Caucus, where he worked to increase access to California's democracy to historically disenfranchised communities. Also has worked in voting rights staff for the ACLU of California, Oakland Public Ethics Commission, and is a Bay Area native. Has worked on redistricting or districting in wide range of jurisdictions in California. Thrilled to have you here today. A lot of really great organizations that I think are near and dear to my heart as well. So thank you for joining us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Jonathan.
I think, Jonathan, that is your cue. We are ready for you to start your presentation.
Great. Good evening, everybody. It is wonderful to see you and to see so many faces here today to learn about redistricting. I'm thrilled. This is a conversation today specifically about one element of redistricting, communities of interest, a core piece of understanding how to engage in your local or your state redistricting process. I want to be clear, though, that this presentation is not a redistricting 101. It's not a conversation about the law that governs redistricting across the nation and in California specifically. If you're interested in those sorts of topics, I would actually recommend that you check out a website we've created with a ton of redistricting resources that cover those topics and other topics. I'm going to put a link in the chat. And you can find both written resources there, but you can also find video trainings and other presentations given. Okay. California Common Cause is an organization I hope you know. We work on voting rights, redistricting, money and politics reform, government transparency, and other democracy-related topics to build a better, more inclusive democracy at the state and local levels across California. I am the executive director of California Common Cause, and I'm thrilled to be joining you today. So we're going to talk about communities of interest. I want to talk first about, I want to start with a story. In November 2003, a freak storm dumped mountains of rain and hail on Watts, California, overwhelming the city's infrastructure and flooding the community. About 150 buildings and homes were heavily damaged. 50,000 people lost power. 6,000 people sought aid from the county's emergency center. Firefighters rescued about 100 people from waist-deep water and snow. But state and federal governments were slow to aid Watts in its time of need. Why? Obviously, because of historical patterns of underinvestment and disenfranchisement that work along lines of race and class and that continue to this day, but also because of district lines, because in the 2001 redistricting completed by the state legislature, Watts was split by incumbents into 3 districts at the congressional level and at the state senate level. Now, this was done in order to keep incumbents in their roles, and it meant that in Watts's time of need, no one felt that Watts was their responsibility. This is a quote from a congressional staffer at the time. At the time of the 2003 flood, I remember our office trying to be very responsive, but there was a lot of ping-ponging of constituents. Watts is cut into 3 different congressional and state senate districts. There was a lot of unnecessary frustration for constituents during a difficult time. This never would have happened if all of Watts belonged in one district. This is a nuts and bolts example of how bad district lines can disempower and silence a community and ensure that it doesn't have access to good representation. So there's actually a happy ending to this story in California. The Voters First Act, the ballot measure sponsored by California Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and others, it was passed in 2008. And as a result, the 2011 redistricting was completed by the nation's first and best statewide independent citizen-run redistricting commission. At the time, it was opposed by the state's Democratic Party and the state's Republican Party, but we've come a really long way since then. The For the People Act, also known as H.R. 1, now the top priority for Democrats in Congress, actually would mandate a statewide independent redistricting commission, California style, in every state. And it turns out that redistricting that is community-centered actually makes a huge difference. In 2011, local Watts leaders came together to testify about Watts before the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, fighting for a united Watts. And Watts was kept whole with 1 state senator and 1 congressional district. Okay, so how do we prevent the Watts story from happening? And by the way, it's not just Watts. There are examples of this all over the state. How do we prevent this from happening in San Francisco? And the answer is it's all about communities of interest, all right? So you're going to hear this term over and over and over throughout the redistricting process. And so it's important that you get to know what a community of interest is. So let's start first with the state definition in the actual state law. A community of interest is a population that shares common social or economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. And the state law calls out one thing that is not a community of interest. A community of interest, communities of interest do not include relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates, okay? So you might be thinking to yourself, all right, great. I mean, thanks for a legal definition, but that doesn't actually help me very much. What actually is a community of interest? So let me try to give you a fuller explanation. A community of interest is a group or a network, or to be redundant, a community that shares interests, views, culture, history, language, values. It's an intentionally broad, intentionally vague term with no black and white definition. It is meant to be flexible so as to encompass any group of people who share interests and self-identify as a community and believe that they should be kept whole in one district so they have a voice in local or state government. The following are examples of what might define a community of interest. People who share political or civic interests, for example, in schools or in housing, in crime and public safety, in transit or traffic, or land use, environmental issues. People who participate in common social or civic networks. For example, people who all go to the same church or temple or mosque, people who are all involved with the same nonprofit or community center, people who seek services from the same service provider. People who share community spaces, green spaces, parks, community centers, markets, shopping centers. People who share a racial or ethnic composition, a cultural identity, a language, or an immigration history. And then lastly, and this is often what defines a community of interest, people who share socioeconomic status, including income, home ownership, or education levels. And these can be mixed or overlapping. It is the case that often a community of color will share an immigration history, or a low-income community with similar socioeconomic characteristics will share political interests in better city services, right? So these things are overlapping, they're complex, they're concentric circles. So what are some real world examples? In the city of San Diego, for example, there's a historic LGBT community that is packed full of LGBT businesses, community centers, service providers. The Hillcrest neighborhood That would be a community of interest. I did work in the city of Chula Vista, helping Chula Vista draw its district lines for the very first time. And in the southwest corner of Chula Vista, tucked between a major highway and the coast, is a very, very low-income community that has suffered from decades of neglect. It doesn't have any city services, no sidewalks, no streetlights, and never had a voice on city council. That is a community of interest, okay? In the Central Valley, there are some parts within a single county that grow certain crops and other parts of the county that grow different crops. They use different water sources. They have different farming techniques. They have different labor needs. Those could be different communities of interest, okay? So let's dive deeper into one concrete example from Long Beach, okay? In the 2001 redistricting, the state legislature drew this boot in order to keep a politician's house in Senate District 28. It forced 2 other Senate districts to have to wrap around that house, cutting the city of Long Beach into 3 state Senate districts. Specifically, and this is what I want to focus on today, it sliced and diced the port area of Long Beach, okay? The port area of Long Beach, now that is a community of interest, okay? So let's talk more, let's dive deeper on that. So the Long Beach neighborhoods around the port experience the traffic and pollution from the nonstop caravans of semi-trucks driving out of the port onto the freeways to distribute goods from the port around the entire Southern California region. The families in those neighborhoods suffer serious health problems because of the pollution. One mom who lived in the neighborhood was asked about it in an interview, and she said, quote, "At least every other day, I have to tell my 8-year-old daughter that she can't play outside with her friends. She has asthma, and we live in an area known as Asthma Alley. We had to go to the hospital night after night. Emma would wake up gasping for air," end quote. The numbers in this area are staggering. Almost one third of families has an adult with asthma. But the way the districts are drawn, the representatives who have the port in their districts are not the same as the representatives who have the communities who experience health problems from port traffic and the pollution in their districts. Unifying the neighborhoods impacted by port traffic into one district would give those communities a chance to elect someone who would actually listen to them and address their concerns. So how would you actually build this into good community of interest testimony? First, good community of interest testimony will talk about shared concerns and interest. In this case, addressing pollution and clean air issues that the community is not able to address through their current representation because of the way district lines are drawn. Second, good community of interest testimony would talk about a shared identity, shared culture, shared language. In this case, it would focus on the fact that working class communities of color live in this area, making the pollution a racial justice and environmental justice concern. And then lastly, good community of interest testimony would provide data to substantiate the personal narratives that come out of the community. In this instance, the Washington neighborhood in this area is one of the poorest parts of Long Beach with almost 20% unemployment at the time. Almost 30% of households have at least one adult with asthma. Almost 20% of households have at least one child with asthma, okay? So you combine all of this, and that is the story of a community. That's the story you tell to the line drawers in your city, your county, or at the state commission, okay? And you basically are advocating for keeping that community together. So what happened in Long Beach? When communities came together to testify about their community, the districts were redrawn by the new California Citizens Redistricting Commission in 2011. And as you can see, the new district lines help put the communities impacted by the Long Beach port and freeways into one district with the port. And now the new representative who represents these communities has actually advanced bills that address the health and environmental impacts of the trucks and the ships that drive through these communities every single day. Okay, so that's one example of a community of interest and how you would compose community of interest testimony. So later in these breakout groups that we're about to jump into, we're going to talk more deeply about the communities of interest in the city of San Francisco. And as you're thinking about it, some questions to consider are, where do you live, work, play, shop, worship, gather, right? Does your community share socioeconomic conditions or characteristics like income level or education level? What kind of housing is common? What kind of jobs do people work? What kind of city services are present or are needed? What is the community's history? How did it come into being? What are the impacts of public policies over time on this community? Is there a common race or ethnicity? Is there an immigration history that's common in the area? Is there a certain language that is spoken more than others? And perhaps most importantly, what are the issues that bind your communities together? What are the common needs? I live in a neighborhood that is in a district with very upper income areas, and my neighborhood here has a totally different set of concerns. We have the same set of concerns around crime and homelessness and some other issues that are much more in common with the district just a few houses down, right? And so I could argue that the issues that are facing my street and my neighborhood bind me together with a different district. And my block and my neighborhood, my community of interest, actually is better suited in a different district, okay? So I recognize that many of you are here today just to learn about redistricting and to give your personal testimony to the Redistricting Task Force in San Francisco. But some percentage of you may be interested in organizing and mobilizing others in your community. And so the next few slides are focusing on leading and mobilizing others, all right? So if you want to help you want to gather community of interest testimony and help others engage in this process, the first thing you have to do is define communities of interest, okay? It's an esoteric term. It's not one that anyone is familiar with. The most plain language way that I try to talk about it is to say, when you give community of interest testimony to your redistricting commission or to your city or county, you're sharing the story of your community. You're sharing what makes it unique. You're sharing its needs. You're sharing its history. You're sharing its people. You're sharing the story of your community. And I want you to reflect for just 1 second on how unusual this is. Government never asks us to share the story of our community. And so it may feel unfamiliar to folks when you first say that this is really what this is all about. It's good to organize community meetings, workshops, small group sessions, Zoom calls, etc. After you've defined a community of interest, you have to then help folks identify their own communities of interest. And that's what we're going to do in the workouts in just a moment. I would actually recommend that if you're doing a regional or neighborhood conversation, bring printed maps of the neighborhood or of your supervisorial district so people can handwrite on the maps and say, this district doesn't include the church I think it should include. It doesn't include this row of markets that everybody shops in, right? Or if you're working in a larger group setting, you could conceivably project a map onto a projector screen, or theoretically, of course, in a virtual environment, you could just screen share on Zoom. Once you've explained what communities of interest are, you have to help people prep their testimony. This does not come naturally to folks. So you can use a template that we're going to use today in the breakout sessions, and I'm going to show you a screenshot of it in just a moment. Or I would actually recommend that you host practice sessions or speakers trainings. We're trying to get people to speak to the San Francisco Redistricting Task Force or any redistricting body who don't normally engage in city politics or county politics. We don't want the usual suspects. I mean, we do want the usual suspects, but we want to go beyond the usual suspects. And that means we want to bring forward people into the redistricting process who have never spoken to a government body before, and they may need some support. And if you want to get really sophisticated with it, you can provide mapping support. Verbal testimony about your community is strengthened if you can also submit a map of your community, okay? If you can submit just a map of your neighborhood, your community of interest, or if you want to be more robust, you can submit a map of what you think your city council district should be, or city supervisorial district should be, or what your state assembly district should be. And if you want to get really aggressive about it, you can present a full district map for the entire city. So that's usually something that you would use a professional demographer for. There are some simple online mapping tools that can help you with this process. Districtor.org and drawmycacommunity.org are two examples. This is a screenshot of the template that we're going to use in the breakout groups. If you want to go deeper, if you want information on redistricting law, if you want info on the process requirements that are in place, if you want best practices for a redistricting process, if you want that template for community of interest testimony, if you want to see video examples of good community of interest testimony, if you want to see a video tutorial on how to use the simple online mapping tools that I just mentioned, if you want sample outreach materials you can use to tweet or post on Facebook, go to our hub of local redistricting materials and resources, commoncause.org/local redistricting 2021. And there you'll find everything that I just described. Okay, that's it for me. I'm going to stop my screen share and hand things back over to our organizers today. And I will see some of you we'll do questions, but then I'll see some of you in a breakout later.
Okay, so I'm going to go over just a couple logistics. I'm Danielle, and I'm the VP of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters. So we're getting ready to break out into sessions. You'll have about 10 to 15 people per group, and there'll be a facilitator for each group. The form that Jonathan was talking about, and thank you so much for providing that form and all of those resources from Common Cause, is available at this link, and that link is also in the chat. There'll be about 20 minutes for the breakout session. And the key to the breakout session really is trying to figure out what is the community that you belong to, what defines it, and then hopefully coming back and providing some key insights, some shared concerns, questions maybe that you have about defining your community of interest back to the larger group. And the hope there is that everybody will get some insight on how do they fully define that community of interest. And what I am going to do is I'm going to go through about a couple minutes of some initial census data that's been broken down by the San Francisco Department of Public Health that talks about essentially where population growth has been, and then a few that came out of actually the San Francisco Chronicle, just ways to look at San Francisco that are kind of a little bit outside the box. So the first one is, here's your kind of current district lines, right? This is where, District 6 is Soma, District 10 is Bayview Hunters Point, 11 is the Excelsior. You see the different district lines that are here. This comes from the San Francisco Department of Public Health. So the key areas that probably, and this could be something like, they're going to grow by 2 blocks or shrink by 2 blocks. But the key areas that have grown in terms of population in this last census are District 6, District 10, and District 11. So these are the areas that are most likely to have some type of impact in terms of their redistrict lines being redrawn. And then just like some outside the box thinking, right? This is not the current district lines of San Francisco, but looking at the population, say, if you feel like the park is a community of interest, above the park, below the park, right? This would be how you would break the population down if we were going to have certainly much smaller districts than what we have right now. Another one is looking at people who are coastal, right? So you have a community of interest that's based around kind of coastal issues. Beach erosion, the Great Highway being kept open to traffic, or being closed down to and closed down and used as a pedestrian and a bike area. So this gives you an idea of the people that might have that type of commonality, that environmental concern that would be in common for them. And then this is purely based on population growth. So between 2010 and 2020, these are really the areas that saw a lot of population growth, right? The ones that are in the blue, and I think it's probably no surprise to anybody that the Dog Patch, Mission Bay, Bayview Hunters Point saw a lot of population growth, a lot of construction happening there in the last 10 years, right? And a lot of people moving into those areas. And again, Soma also, which is District 6, seeing a lot of population growth as well. So as we break out into these sessions, think about, maybe this framing as a way that you can look at what is your community of interest, what draws you together. I loved actually Jonathan mentioning, a string of merchants that all work together. I would say that, a big thing in my own community that has really drawn people together here has been keeping local businesses. I live in the outer Richmond, and keeping local businesses in business during COVID has been something that you can definitely see that residents here are trying to do. They're trying to get out there. So I think that you need to think about it in terms of everything that draws your community together. And now we're going to actually go out into the breakout sessions.
Danielle, I just want to pause for a moment and see if there were any questions from attendees, either in the chat or before we break out. To do the breakout rooms, I just want to pause for a minute and see if any questions, especially Jonathan's really great presentation a couple of minutes ago.
That is an awesome, I didn't see anything in the chat, but if there are any questions, if you can drop them into the chat, or actually you could probably unmute yourself and ask a verbal question during this meeting, because we've left some of the controls off that you normally see in a lot of these types of meetings.
Will we be able to influence how the districts are drawn?
Jonathan, do you want to?
I mean, I think the league leaders on this call could answer that just as well as I could. The answer is yes. I mean, certainly the intention is yes. There are countless examples of where redistricting commissions have reacted to or been responsive to public testimony. And in fact, in some instances have been very responsive to public maps. I worked with the city of Sunnyvale as it transitioned to its first ever district map. And the map that the city council adopted was a map that the community had drawn. A group of different community organizations, community members from diverse backgrounds come together to create something called the Unity Map. And they advocated for it throughout the process, and the city council just adopted their map. So there's plenty of instances in where that's happened. There's also instances in which public testimony has been ignored, and those in power have done what those in power want to do. So redistricting can go well and it can go badly. And it's just up to all of us to sort of put pressure on and be engaged so it goes well.
Just one more question. So are all the officials chosen who are going to be making these redistricting decisions?
Yes, the 9-person committee, so 3 elected from the San Francisco Election Commission, 3 elected from the Board of Supervisors, and then from the mayor's office. So yes, they are all currently elected right now. And I'm betting that someone from LWVSF can provide a link to that, because I know that's in our redistricting information.
I think there's also some questions in the chat about numbers, and I think you might have covered some of this just now in your census data, but like, what are the numbers that we're looking at to divide into in San Francisco, and what's the change going to be for the upcoming districts?
So the margin allowance to balance the district population, that actually was a question we just talked about yesterday. I am not 100% sure if that's set by state redistricting or local redistricting laws. So it may be that it's part of the city attorneys, because San Francisco is a charter city. I know it's within a few percentage points, but I don't know the exact number on that. If anybody does, Jonathan, if you happen to know, I'd be happy, but we were looking. I think it's within like 1% or so.
Yeah, I saw the city charter, and I'm operating off of my memory here, which is terrible, but my memory of the city charter is that the expectation is that districts will be within 1% of each other unless greater deviation must occur in order to keep neighborhoods and communities of interest together. So that is to say, it's supposed to be very tight, but there's more deviation allowed under specific circumstances.
And it looks like Jen Say just posted, so equal in population, supervisory districts must adhere to the ideal of 1 person, 1 vote, but it's nearly impossible to have exactly the same number of people in every district. I'm guessing this comes from the charter. The charter allows variations 1%, so 732 people per district. Additional variations up to 5%, so that would be 3,660 people per district, are allowed if necessary to prevent dividing or diluting the voting power of minorities or to keep recognized neighborhoods intact. So yeah, 1 to 5% basically as applicable.
I do also, there's a lot of really interesting commentary in the chat and the sign-in sheet, but I want to call out Linda from the McLaren Park Collaborative, pointing out that the park right now is split between 3 districts, and they want to know how to maintain the representation by all the districts that surround the park.
Hi, this is Linda. My question is a little different. We have an area of interest, but geographically, the neighborhoods that surround the park have the park as a major interest, but right now they are in 3 separate supervisorial districts. That seems to have worked well for us because then we have more than 1 supervisor who takes an interest in the park. The park has 0 population, so it doesn't factor into the numbers, but people who live around the park all have similar problems and experiences with the park, as well as the experience of being near the park. I saw that one example above and below Golden Gate Park. If McLaren was to be a dividing line for 2 districts, that might be an interest, but I could see, you know, it's like when a park is that central to your neighborhood, sometimes that's a big factor. I don't know how it's worked so far, but do we want to change it, and how do we maintain that if that is the goal?
I think that's a very valid point. And I think that actually one of the examples that I was using with some of our facilitators earlier was the idea of why not create like a line down the city, right, where Golden Gate Park is, and then take the neighborhoods that surround it and make that one community of interest. And you have a board of supervisors representative who is really, is focused on just that one thing. But you also bring up a great thing to that, which is now you have 3 supervisors that actually really care about Golden Gate Park. So maybe that's actually a better way to do it. But it just because it's a little crazy doesn't mean that you wouldn't go through. I think it's a little bit like what Jonathan was talking about. You might need a professional cartographer to really go through and redraw district lines if you wanted to do something as extreme as, say, I want the park to be a community of interest, or I want the coastal lands. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worthy of something of public testimony. Right.
Jonathan,
it doesn't mean that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yep.
I thought I saw Jonathan go off mute for a second. Do you have something to add?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was only going to add that sometimes what communities advocate for in redistricting processes can be counterintuitive. So this is a perfect example. You might say all the communities bordering the park on all sides share a set of interests, and their housing is similar, socioeconomics are similar, and so on. It's a natural community of interest, and ordinarily in a redistricting process, you would fight to keep that community of interest together. But it's common where a community might say, actually, for other reasons, it makes more sense to split this up. Like in this instance, it totally makes sense to say, the park is such a central part of San Francisco that if there are 3 supervisorial districts that include part of the park, we'll have 3 supervisors who care about this. For example, I did the work in Sunnyvale I mentioned earlier, where I was working with a number of community organizations to help draw a district map for the city. The Asian American community in Sunnyvale had the opportunity to maximize their voting power in 2 districts. And ordinarily, that's what a community would do. But the Asian American community said, no, we don't want to maximize our voting power in the 2nd district, because by drawing a slightly different district, we can empower the Latino community, and we can make sure that city council districts track with school district boundaries. And that's really important to us as parents, right? So sometimes you have a complicated set of priorities or interests in a redistricting process, and it leads to counterintuitive outcomes, and that's fine.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Linda, for bringing that up. We have another question in the chat about, will the meeting notice be posted for San Francisco? I am guessing that this is the redistricting task force. They will be posting website and meeting dates in the coming future. You can follow us at the League, and we will be drawing attention to that as well.
What website will they be on?
So, hi, I'm Lauren Girardin with the League of Women Voters of San Francisco. And so the city has not yet decided where the redistricting task force's meeting calendar and other information will live yet. We are anxiously awaiting that information. And as soon as we hear that information, we will share it on all of our various ways of sharing information. Our newsletter is great to subscribe for. We will definitely announce that there. And our social media, and also on our website. So keep an eye on those. We will definitely make a lot of noise when that happens.
I don't see any other questions, but do we want to move to breakout rooms? Danielle, do you think that that's the next step here?
I think we're ready to rock and roll in breakout rooms. That sounds good. And Kathy, that is your cue.
Here we go. Get ready, guys. You should all be receiving an invite, or you'll be automatically sent to breakout rooms. I will stay here in case there are any issues. And the folks that are still in this room, you should be receiving an invite to join a breakout room. It should be an alert. You might just have to click join.
Are we supposed to be invited to a breakout room in a district that we live in, or are they random?
It will be random. There,
Okay.
I tried to group as many people as possible in the same district, so but it is pretty random.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And Julie, were you able to? Okay, were you able to see the invite? Okay, great. Linda, Barbara, Tyler. Can you all see the invite for the group, for the breakout rooms? Linda, Barbara, Tyler. For the folks that are in this room, just want to make sure, do you see the invite for the breakout room? Hey, Jen. Do you want to be assigned to a room or did you get kicked off?
No, I decide to leave because I'm actually gonna go do something real quick and then come
Okay.
back.
No problem. Just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
Sorry, Anne. I took up everyone's time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello.
I like to see all the faces pop up because we were all camera off and now we're all camera on again.
Well, that's because people were in breakout sessions where they actually were talking to other people. All right, so does anyone from any of the facilitators, right, that did breakout sessions, does anybody have like a key insight, something they learned, something that was really interesting, a controversial neighborhood, or even someone from their group that they would like to be able to have share a particular issue that came up in their breakout session?
Yeah, for my session, I would love if Simon, you could share. He comes from D11 and had a great way of describing his community. So,
yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Simon Timoney. I'm with Advocates 11, a community organization started with my fiance in March. I'm very interested in this as I'm born and raised in District 11, and I want to have a family here one day. That's all I'm doing here. But our district is, it needs love, it needs attention, and it is a working class blue collar district. In a sense, the people who live here do the jobs that not a lot of other people want to do. We're the hotel maids, we're the janitors, we are the cops and even the criminals. But we all need, a certain amount of love and attention. Housing, we're mostly renters, a few family houses, but nothing posh. We have some wonderful recreational places. We have Minnie and Lovey Ward Park, which is a fantastic story all on its own. And I was mentioning that my Buddhist Sangha is a block from a mosque, is a block from a church. And we would really love to, have all of those people come to the table. Our issues right now, it's crime. It is crime and it is education, and those are the two things I think we focus on here in D11. Income level, poor to middle class, but mostly I want to address that. I think the thing that has stood out to me is that districts have a spirituality into them. There is definitely a spirituality with District 11. Our neighborhoods, OMI, Ingleside, Excelsior, have a vibe, and a little bit of my D11 has crept into 7 somehow. And I'm just here to say I would really love it if I had 2 supervisors representing one street, Ocean Avenue, that's been hit a lot this last year and a half. And so those are the few things that I have to say. I'm sure there's a lot more stories like that, and I want to hear them. So thank you.
I'm happy to share or volunteer to share Lauren from my group, because I really liked her. We were talking about unique aspects of community, and she had an interesting one for Bernal Heights.
Yeah, so I live in Bernal Heights, but I always tell people I live in Southwest Bernal Heights, because you think of Bernal Heights, you think of Reseda Park, you think of the part that faces the city, and I face the Excelsior. I have a view of the hill across the highway from me. And the thing that I always think about when I think about where I live is where my mass transit hub is. And for me, that's Glen Park Park. That's not part of D9 where I am, that's over in D8. I used to live in the Mission, and for a while, I was 24th Street Park. Before that, I was 16th Street Park. Before that, I was Civic Center Park. So as someone who doesn't own a car, that's really important to me and how I think of my community. And then also near me, Mission Street is actually the line between D8 and D9 in this area. And that means our little tiny merchant area, which is filled with a lot of small businesses, a lot of Latino-owned businesses, is divided into 2 supervisor districts. And I'm really curious to talk to my neighbors about whether that's a good thing for them or whether that's not a great thing for them. We've got a landmark historical bar that's been around for about as long as anything in San Francisco can be around. We have a number of parks, St. Mary's Park, Holly Park, Bernal Heights Park, and we're kind of in the middle of a lot of neighborhoods, and the district line is real close. So I get a little nervous, things might change, but I think there's a lot of ways to think about Bernal Heights as not just one neighborhood on a hill, but as a series of communities that have shared interests, but also separate interests and things in common with their neighbors in a district across the way.
Thank you, Lauren.
Anybody else? I would nominate someone from my group. Actually, I think also a kind of a, not the same exact neighborhood, but some adjacent neighborhoods. So Mary Harris, if she is on, she had attended a lot of the redistricting meetings in 2010, 2011 timeframe, but had a lot of really good insights on kind of like the OMI neighborhood. So I'd love to nominate her to talk.
I just wanted to say that when I went to the redistricting meetings, I thought it was important to attend as many as possible, because it seemed to me that when you weren't in the room, that could be the time that they were discussing changes to your district. I think people should keep in mind that when these changes are made, it has a domino effect. So it doesn't just affect your district lines, but it could affect the district next to you or above you, below you, etc. I think it's important to have dialogue with the nonprofits, the CBOs, the people of interest in your community. And I also mentioned, and it's not personal, but that when you showed the district map, it only had the Excelsior. It didn't have the Ocean View, Merced Heights, Ingleside neighborhood. So the first time we lost half of Ocean Avenue, and that worked out okay because we had two supervisors looking out for Ocean Avenue, which had things going on that needed looking after. The second time we lost Ocean Avenue to 7, and we got pushed back to Holloway. So I would like to see that if we do have more people, and I think we do it once again, that the lines be drawn more equally, that the edges, you know, kind of get shared, what the cutoffs are between the Excelsior and the OMI. I admire the people in my district. I know them equally well because I'm president of the District 11 Council. We have a lot of people that really care about their neighborhood. And so I wouldn't want to go into any of these meetings without having a real common dialogue with them, that how we can support one another. And I thank Simon for joining us. He's a great addition. He started the Advocates 11 to work on Asian crime, and he did that all on his own. So we have a lot of good people out here, but we want to keep our supervisor and make sure that we have equality out here, and that the diversity that we have in our neighborhood, which we have a lot of it, we embrace it and we welcome everybody. Thank you.
Danielle, it's Michelle here. I just wonder if someone from either our little intimate group or anyone else who's attending can comment on the process of going through the template and through the questions, whether that did serve as a thought starter, thinking you about aspects of your community of interest, either geographically or however defined, that you perhaps had not before, and did it generate thoughts about the community in a different way, or tell us just how that worked for you.
In my group, I have to say I showed the template, but we didn't use it. But I know that Anne's group was kind of heads down on the template. So I wonder, Anne, Merrill, did your group share? Did you get enough time to be able to share insights, right, from what people were writing on the template?
We needed more time to share our insights. I think we found it very, very interesting. The template was useful. It really laid out a good way of formatting what might be testimony going forward, and really raised all the potential angles of looking at your community, but we were heads down and needed more time, I think. Very thought-provoking though, very thought-provoking.
I mean, that's a good lesson for us. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. If you're comfortable with it, Curtis, from my group, would you mind sort of talking about the boundaries around, because I think one of the useful questions on that template is the question of boundaries. Could you talk a little bit about the boundaries of the Tenderloin and how you might approach that in a redistricting context, if you're comfortable with it?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Curtis Bradford, community organizer for Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation and co-chair of the Tenderloin People's Congress. So we, we're talking about a little bit about how I just, want to make sure that we keep the Tenderloin neighborhood geographically intact when we're considering redistricting, because it's a very defined neighborhood. We all, we share very similar challenges and opportunities, similar architecture. It's a very clear definition of, when you've stepped into the Tenderloin neighborhood by the culture and the climate of the Tenderloin, you're there, and you've left as soon as you step out. Part of that is defined by the fact that when you're in the Tenderloin, people will all stop and say hi to each other. We all know each other. It's actually a real neighborhood. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody talks to everybody. It takes me half hour to walk across the neighborhood because I have to stop and chat with everybody. As soon as you step out of the Tenderloin, that stops. So when you're in the TL. But I just, it's a very clear defined neighborhood. Even within the Tenderloin, we talk about it as being the most diverse 49 square blocks in America. So we know what our 49 square blocks are. And we're low income, working families, a high density of immigrant, people of color, seniors, disabled, and of course, the highest density of children in San Francisco. So, we are very self-identified, and it's very clear and obvious. And I think it's important to us to sort of retain those boundaries. The People's Congress, which is the resident-led organization, defined the geographic area. It was adopted by the Tenderloin the Tenderloin Community Benefit District uses it as their template for the boundaries of the Tenderloin neighborhood when determining who's a resident for their board, for example. So, we have a clear defined district, and I just want to make sure we stay intact.
Thanks for sharing that.
Anyone else? Does anybody else have anybody from their groups they want to nominate to talk, or any other kind of aha moments that you might have had, right?
There was something that Eric Marr said he could share.
What I was saying was that for Richard Rothman, who's an Outer Richmond District resident, I could share with him some of the discussions that happened about District 1. And I'll just say I'm a former supervisor. I was on the original redistricting task force and the elections task force in the 90s. This is a great process, great conversations. I'm curious about the demographic changes over the last 10 years from the push out of Black people out of the city and low income people, and also the rise of Asian American and Latino populations historically, and how voting rights at a national level impacts how we think about protecting of ethnic voting blocks, or also how ethnic voting blocks might not be homogeneous. And there may be some renters that are Asian Americans versus high income Asian Americans that might not be a community of interest. But this is a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to participating.
I have a question about, I have a question about finding the right people who could be most influential in helping us get our information and our issues across. There are some people who have higher visibility, and I'm concerned about how do we find those people.
I was going to jump in on that one, just because that's the community of interest process, right? So it is every average person, me, you, your neighbors, your friends. It's your chance to tell the redistricting task force members who are not elected officials. These are people who were appointed, but they are supposed to be there to represent the folks of San Francisco. And so submitting your community of interest testimony or a map giving public comment at those meetings, which the league will have an event about in the future. You know, that is how you are heard. And if you want to be taken more seriously, find more neighbors, get more people in the community of interest that you have to come with you and to also give public comment. The more the merrier, the more influential, because one of the things that we've seen in the league is not a lot of people show up for government meetings. And so you can actually have a pretty outsized voice if you show up. So sometimes it's going to be hard. The meetings might be during the day, but you know, sometimes they're going to be on the weekends too. And you can also submit public comment, you know, by email when they finally get their system set up. So that's what I say for that is get more friends to come on board with you. You know, talk to your neighbors, talk to other folks in your community, and start these conversations. Do this conversation that we did today with folks that you identify with as your neighbors, and start this, because we can see that these conversations take some time. So start educating them about this as well. You know, be the champion for redistricting in your neighborhood.
I'm muted. I'm not muted now. Okay, so I think we're at time. Thank you for all of your comments. I know we have some redistricting task force members in attendance today. So thank you all for coming here, sharing your thoughts. I hope that this was thought-provoking and really begins you to think about your communities of interest and how we can make sure that this process hears from our neighbors. So this is just like the timeline. This is from our website, lwvsf.org/redistricting. Like we've mentioned, the task force will be meeting in the future. We do not know yet, but by April 2022, they will present a new map to the Board of Supervisors. I recommend going to our website, lwvsf.org. Also, it would be remiss if, as the League of Women Voters, did not remind you to drop off your ballot for the September 14th election. All voters in San Francisco have received a ballot already. If you have not received it yet, go to lwvsf.org/vote to find more information about how to return your ballot, or if you haven't received your ballot, what to do. It's a great resource. Share with all your friends, family, and neighbors. Also, we have an upcoming event in October. We're gonna have a spotlight on housing and homelessness. Also, ways you can keep in touch. I know we've been talking about the newsletter. If you're on social media, we are active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And so if you are interested, please follow us. And this is all done by volunteers, just like some of the folks you've met today. We are entirely volunteer organization. If you'd like to join us, lwvsf.org. Also, we depend on donations. So if you found this to be a great event, chip in a couple of bucks, because some of these things are not free. Zoom costs money. A lot of these resources, we do depend on donations from folks